Hello again. What with all the spare time we've got at the moment, stuck indoors, it's nice to look through some of those kits that need building or repairing. One very popular kit here in Europe that I thought might make an interesting video is the multi-band Fuchskreis ATU. It's fairly simple, but there are a few common mistakes that people make, which if we know in advance, it's very easy to avoid some of the pitfalls. It's available from the QRP Shop in Berlin. I'll put the address in the description. It's qrp-shop.biz. It costs €49. That may seem like quite a lot, but some of the components in it are quite high quality. You'll notice here we have a switch made by a company called Grayhill. To buy them new, they cost about €8 or €9, and then if you buy two with postage and packing, you're getting on for about €30. So it's not that bad value. And I have a finished one here that's been sent to me for repair, so we're going to have a closer look at this in a minute. What else? There is a lot of information about resonant end-fed tuners on the SOTA reflector. Here's a thread by KX0R. Loads and loads of theoretical information and considerations. Lots of diagrams. You can make either a very simple tuner or you can work your way up and make a very, very complex one. It's up to you. Or you can just stick with the Fuchskreis. So this is something that you can modify as well. There are some English instructions to go with this kit. Here they are. And we have a nice circuit diagram here. You'll notice that unlike the version on the SOTA reflector, this version is wound on two toroids. We have one toroid for inductance, one toroid for coupling. So this is something you're going to have to consider very carefully if you're going to start modifying it, because it is slightly different. So one other thing to mention before we go any further is some hams have complained that it's not easy to get a very low SWR on 80 meters. There are two ways you can approach this problem. One way that we're going to look in this video is to add two more windings here. So instead of one winding, you're going to have three windings on L1 at this point here. Another much simpler solution, which I've found effective, is just to make the antenna a little bit longer by about 2 meters, and that just helps bring the SWR down. I can get about 1.4 to 1 by making the antenna longer. But in this video, we're in search of perfection, so we're going to see what happens when we add a few more windings here. So there we go, that's the instructions. The first thing to get on with, of course, is drilling your enclosure, and we have a diagram down here. Oh, one thing I should also point out is there's a parts list here. Okay, so if you're in America, you don't have to buy this kit and ship it all the way to America. You've got a parts list here. You can make it for yourself. These are all very easily got hold of on the other side of the Atlantic. Drilling the enclosure, okay. It's always a good idea to use some masking tape on your enclosure. Cover it in masking tape. It makes marking it off and changing things around a lot easier. Another thing to be aware of is drill bit sizes, and the sizes of your components may not always be as specified. So it's always a good idea to start off small and work your way up. One other thing is that some of these components, the rotary switches and the BNC, obviously have flat sides. It's intended that they should be gripped by the casing so that they don't move about. So again, you might want to start off just with the width of the actual flat sides on your rotary switches, and then use a file to enlarge the hole. That way your components are going to be gripped nice and securely. And remember, when measuring everything, always measure with the lid on in this kit. You'll notice this is halfway. If you measure halfway here, your BNC is going to be off position. So I also have an old casing here from my old kits. Let's turn it round. And one thing you might also notice as you look at it is that things are in different positions. If we look at this one that's been sent to me for repair, it's been made exactly as the instructions suggest it should, with the variable capacitor right in the middle. It works, but I find it's your fingers, you can't get your finger in between those two switches. So it's a little bit crowded here, and there's no real reason for it. It's very easy to move the variable capacitor in this direction towards the banana plug, and you can also move these rotary switches about 5 mils towards this end if you like, and it makes everything a bit more spaced out. Here you'll see the rotary switches are where they should be, but I've moved the variable capacitor back and it just spaces things out nicely. One more thing to consider before we move on is this LED here. The kit comes with a holder. The person hasn't used the holder there, he's just put the LED straight in. You can do that, it's just a nice touch to use the holder. Also, it's a red LED. In broad daylight, a red LED will be a little bit hard to see, so I prefer to use a white or blue LED. This idea was originally given to me by Thomas Zirk, OE6TZE, who's provided a huge amount of input and guidance to me on making these kits. I'm very grateful to him for that. So we're going to be sourcing a white or blue LED to go in here. We haven't got one yet, that's to come. So like I say, this tuner has been sent to me for repair. It's not working for one reason or another, so we're going to have a look at this. We're going to completely rebuild it and see what we can do. I've taken the back off. Let's have a look inside it. The first thing to note when we look at this is actually the banana plug. It might look fine, but actually it's made out of stainless steel and it won't solder at all unless you have the right flux. Even then, it's just a lot easier to just buy a nickel one. So the first thing to do is we're going to swap out this banana jack, this banana socket, for a nickel plated one, which they're all very, very inexpensive. No reason not to get one of those. I don't know what happened somewhere at the QRP shop. A load of these stainless steel banana sockets have unfortunately got into the kits, and there's lots of frustrated hams all over Europe desperately trying to solder them and having no success whatsoever. If we have another look at this kit, we'll see it's really very crowded. It's not easy to see where things are going. We've got wires going all over the place, lots of hot glue, which I try to avoid wherever possible. I mean, the wires are insulated, that's fine. You don't have to insulate them, it will work fine without them. If we have a look at some of these switches, oh dear, we can see here when I turn that, it's very loose in that hole, so that's one issue we're going to have to look at. And this one, yeah, it's moving a bit on that side. So these rotary switches are a little bit loose. We're going to have to take the whole thing apart. It looks to me like the main problem is whoever made this assembled it or tried to assemble it with the rotary switches in place in the housing. This is really a recipe for disaster. If you are going to make this, you must get a set of helping hands, and you can make these leads much shorter and assemble the whole thing, assemble the rotary switches and the toroids outside of the enclosure. Your whole assembly is going to be a hell of a lot easier if you do that. So yes, we're going to have to strip this down completely and start again. But that is for another video. This is going to be in 3 parts, this series. So in the next video we're going to look at winding these toroids properly and some of the issues regarding winding those. Many people find that a bit tricky. It's not too bad if you just follow the instructions. And then the final video, we're going to look at the final assembly of the unit and probably if there isn't a better sequence we can use. Just one last thing before we move on. You'll notice that, as I pointed out earlier, you should always measure with the lid on, and here's what happens if you don't. You'll see that the banana jack there is not in the middle. It just means it's much deeper in the housing, so it's a lot harder to get to and fiddle with, and the same goes for the BNC on the other side. It's it's a lot deeper in the housing, so you're making a rod for your own back if you don't measure with the lid on. So that's all for this video. I hope you found it useful, some useful information there. Stay tuned for part 2 and part 3, where we completely strip this down and rewind the toroids, see if we can't improve this Fuchskreis. That's all for now. See you later.